Hello, everybody, and welcome back to That Milan podcast. Martino Puccio, Matt Santangelo, and recurring guest. I think you might take the lead for most appearances now on this podcast. Oli Fisher of Sempre Milan, good friend of ours, boss as well. So, how are the both of you doing? You got a nice layover from Milan after a typical dropping of points against a relegation fodder side. So, how are you guys?
As you can see, I'm pretty exhausted. Milan has beaten me down these days. I also was talking to Martino before we went live, Oli, that I had a 11 p.m. indoor game yesterday, and we had no subs, and we're down a guy at one point. So I'm completely shot right now. So it's a well-timed day off. But as I just tweeted too, like it feels like it's been a couple months since I watched that match, and it's only been 10 days, give or take. So I'm ready to obviously dive into the next fixture, which is Juventus.
Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it? So you played the full game, man down. I guess you know what it feels like to be Fofana now.
Yeah, exactly.
And Reijnders.
My first San Siro experience. Gotta love watching your team play down about 70 minutes.
Man. Yeah,
it was very on brand. Very on brand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also on brand. Milan being in the conversation of will they keep their star players or not, which is essentially what we're here to talk about today. We're not really going to be discussing the Juventus match this coming weekend, although we should preface by saying Dusan Vlahovic has been ruled out for that match already, so advantage for Juventus. So moving on to these contract extension talks. There has been a boatload of them. It feels like it happens all the time with Milan. When you think that they're in a good shape, when they extend a player like Rafael Leao, you get another player or two around the corner. And this time, I would say all four players that we're discussing today are major pieces moving forward for this project and the foundation of the club. So with that, we'll start off with Tijani Reijnders. Oli, this is something that you guys have discussed on the Sempre Milan podcast. You, Maddie, and Torgrud were pretty much all discussing, hey, like, do you think this is a fair extension for what he is asking for? 1.7 million net, which is very cheap for the level of player that he has been for the club. And it's really just, from what I understand and what you guys were talking about, just a doubling of the salary, which would still be less than, for example, guys, Ruben Loftus-Cheek. So this is a no-brainer. This is, you get it done as soon as you can. I even said extend his newborn son as well, if that's what it takes.
Yeah.
I think we're lowballing him even with a double of an extension. Like, he deserves more than that at this point, in my opinion. And when you kind of look through the landscape of this entire sport, he's still going to be severely underpaid if we get him in for $3.5 million. Ali, I'll go to you first. How true are kind of these figures being talked about with Reijnders? Again, you guys had mentioned it on the podcast, but is this something that Milan can legitimately get done? And I know the idea is to do this in June, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be so it kicks in for next season, so we can get that extra year, kind of like the Kamada thing, but slightly different circumstances. Right. I'm glad that you said that, though, about how doubling his salary wouldn't necessarily be enough. It's not just a market rate thing. And first shameless plug of the episode, I wrote something about this last night that went out on the site, basically about how with all these renewal situations, it's sort of like a statement of ambition, sure, but with Reijnders in particular, and we've seen the reports from some reliable and some unreliable sources about the level of clubs that are taking note of his performances, talking about Real Madrid and Manchester City above all. I'm not so worried about him going to Spurs, for example, but those two teams who, could really use a technical creative midfielder. It's all right saying we can and are willing to double his salary, but other teams will quadruple it, and we need to be very careful when we get into those areas. It is absolutely no coincidence that we have acted ahead of time. There have been, and it's been verified, scouts from a lot of top clubs that have come to San Siro and have been at other games to watch him. I don't think that's too uncommon. Like you will see it all the time. Scouts from Manchester City will be at Real Madrid versus AC Milan, because if they're not, then they're not doing their job. So it's not panic stations in that sense, but I don't think it is a coincidence at all that these renewal talks are fired up. We know that he's worth a lot more than 1.7 million net. We signed him on, and this this extends for a lot of the players that we signed that you would consider to be in that 15, 20 million range. You sign him on like an entry-level deal because we're taking a bit of a risk by signing a player from the Dutch league to begin with. The idea is that we get the scouting on him right. He excels, he grows with us, and then, his next contract comes. The thing with Reijnders that I think people sometimes forget is that he is 26, will turn 27 next year. He's getting towards that prime contract, i.e. the next contract that he signs will probably be the biggest of his career. And that's why I think that it's certainly a good starting point that he seems to really like it here. He gave an interview to Di Marzio where he said, I see myself staying at Milan until my 30s. And that his father is his agent. That's also good because I think his dad is also very happy that he's here. He advised him to join us over Barcelona. All very good. But we've got to go to him and say, look, we know that you're actually worth 5 mil. And I think that will be the starting point, to be honest. I don't put much credence to these 3.5 numbers. If Reijnders' dad has any I don't know, any parental skills, shall we say, he should be going in and saying, well, he's up there with Leao, in terms of being the most important player in the team. Not necessarily saying that he should earn the same, but say, because Theo's agent went in and asked for 8 mil net, it's obviously because Leao's deal is now the benchmark. And that's what we got when we signed that contract. People didn't necessarily put 2 and 2 together, but it wasn't just about Leao's deal when we penned him in for 7 million, including bonuses. It was a knock-on that meant. We were raising our ceiling, and it's for players like Reijnders that it perfectly applies. I can't see it getting done at 3 point something. I think the number will probably start with a 5, including bonuses. That would be my guess, and I'd be absolutely fine with that.
Of course, Matt. Do you agree with the same? Again, I believe as of today, that would make him the second highest paid player on the team if you started with 5 million net. So
that's right.
Again, if you have that conversation, Matt, and we've all had this, you could argue he is their second best player right now since he joined last year. He's certainly in the conversation for it. So do you think that's a fair figure?
I do. I think, look, people on the surface might say, well, we're doubling his salary. That's a fantastic deal for him. He should take it. He should be accepting of that. But I agree with Oli. I think, look, this is a player that, when we actually bought him from the Dutch league, I think there was a lot of doubt and criticism. They're like, this guy's 26, 25. Why hasn't many other clubs gone in earlier for him if he's a very good player? Typically, players from this league usually are getting poached at 21, 22, and then they go to their next big club. And that's where you start to see them really sort of blossom into the player that they could become. But I think Tijani, and credit to him, because I think that, last year, there were moments where, the people were highlighting his lack of, clinical finishing. This guy's, a great, puncher of the ball. I mean, I think, I'm not saying he's as good as Hakan, but I think when he does get the ball right, the technique is fantastic. He's one of the best ball strikers we have on this team. And I've always emphasized in not even just previous episodes of previous, years of recording with you, Martino, that, we need to be able to get goals from the midfield position. I think the best teams that we've seen in Serie A, even going back years with Atalanta, it's not just the forward men getting goals. It's, they're getting production from their midfield players and guys that could be a threat from distance. And I think that Tijani has become a player of that caliber as well. But I think getting back to the salary, as Ali highlighted, 5 million seems like a very fair figure. I think it's going to come in right under, the guys that have been here, more senior players and players that have been at the very beginning of this project, like Rafa, Theo, hopefully Maignan as well. But I think it shows Milan does have that ambition and they does have that desire to raise their wage bill, which is something that people have also mentioned and pointed out. With getting a better squad, more talented individuals, comes that opportunity where you're going to have to pay these players. But I just want to sort of tie it all up to Ali's point when he was mentioning Manchester City's, the Real Madrids of the world. It might be a little bit more scary to hear those teams circling for one of our best players, in top 3, in my opinion, this year for sure. But I'd argue that's a validation of Milan's management, their scouting department, getting players at that age of their career where they're trusting the evaluation, they're trusting the eye test, they're looking at all the data, and they're getting their signings right. So I think that that's a good conversation to be having, right? You're not having some lowly Serie A teams coming in for some of these players. You're having the top dogs, that the clubs that are always synonymous with the big transfers coming in for your best players. And I think that Milan needs to put their money where their mouth is and say, hey, look, if we're not going to go and, maybe spend 40, 50, 60 million on a solo player, we're going to do our absolute best to retain these players. And so far, by all accounts, they've done a really good job with that. So I think that, this is a podcast, and I know Oli, you and the Sempre guys as well, pride themselves on giving credit where it's due. People have to give credit to this management, because if they're able to get these 4 players signed to new deals plus Rafa, then it's a really good conversation of, okay, Milan can get deals done. They can bring players in, develop certain players, and retain their top guys. And if you look at what Tijani is at this part of his career, he is a top guy. And he's also in that age of 26, 27, where he is part of this foundation, right? You look at Rafa, you look at Tomori, you look at, Theo, Maignan. A lot of these guys are in that sort of 25 to 28 range. And I think that that is also a key part of it, is building a core that you can take with you to the future.
Yeah, and I think the last point to kind of make on the salary as well, which is very important, and how the salary is going to age later into that, right? So say like he's getting 5 million net per season, so he just signs for that. You're looking at someone in, let's say, 2028, right? A couple years left on his contract. The amount that certain players are going to be getting paid at that point in time in the Premier League and the top clubs in La Liga, Bayern, PSG, that's still going to be a pretty cheap contract 4 years from now. It's nothing outrageous, right? Because if we look back to Kessie just a few years ago, he was asking for 6. So when a player of that caliber, and I think he's a better all-around player than Kessie, I don't think there's a question in that. I think Kessie did his job better than what Reijnders could do. Obviously, that's why we haven't replaced that. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I think the way this contract would age with Reijnders, like it has already, is going to be significant for the team, because again, you're locking it, and it was really scary to see that 5-year contract is going to take us to 2030. That's how soon we are there. It's just scary to just see that year out there. But the point remains, in what you're both saying, is that you have to get this done. You have to keep a player like this. And I would say my final point is, on top of it, if you resell a Reijnders, and I understand maybe if that were to happen, it's around an astronomical figure for his age and what we paid for him. What's the end game here? Isn't the point of this project, and to take Milan to these new heights, to keep players like this, to have players like this eventually, that we no longer have to sell them? And I understand sometimes numbers are numbers, and it's hard to turn down certain figures for certain players like Tonali. I get it to an extent. But isn't the whole idea of eventually selling a player like that and bringing new ones in, so you don't have to repeat that process? Because if you're repeating that process, then you're exactly the type of club that everyone is accusing you of, and that's a Dortmund, that's a Leipzig, that's a club that consistently just sells and rechurns out these players instead of keeping them for the long term in what top clubs do, right? Juve, during their dominant era, and I know it's different fiscally and all that kind of stuff, Juve always did a great job of keeping their best players. Very rarely were they letting someone go, and that was Pogba for a record transfer. That still, I don't believe, has been topped in terms of midfielders that I could think of. So when you kind of have a situation like that, like we're not selling our best players unless the offer is too good to turn down, I just hope that's the case with Reijnders. Because again, if we're selling like for 50 million, to me, that's nowhere near good enough. That's it for the type of player that he is. I would say, and I'm not saying this would happen, 70 million or something higher would have to be the number for me to excuse this sort of sale, because he's way too valuable at this point in time for the club. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Reijnders stuff. And last question for both of you before we move on to the next player. Oli, does Reijnders end up extending and staying with Milan in your opinion? And Matt, same question.
Yeah, I think he does. I think he does. But I think that the lack of urgency with regards to the deadline, given that he signed a multi-year deal when he arrived last summer, means that yeah, there just isn't the same sense of urgency as there is for, say, a Theo or a Maignan. So it maybe takes a bit of time. It maybe does drag into next summer. And maybe that does give his dad/agent the leverage to field some calls. But I am confident that it gets done. I think Kessie, in terms of making his declaration of love, we've been stung by that. We know not to trust public comments and take everything at face value. However, I do feel like he has a strong attachment to the club, and he will never agitate for a move. And while ever there's the willingness to renew from both parties, then you have the conditions to proceed. And like you said, just circling back to that, I think we all want the first step towards Milan being considered a top club again is that we're a destination rather than a stepping stone, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that with Reijnders and with the players that we're going to talk about, I think the fact that they all, on the face of things, want to renew, they want to stay, they want to experience the prime of their careers at this club is a positive. And I say it on our podcast all the time, and it's the players that say it, so it's not just me, making it up. When things are going well at Milan, there is no better place to play football. I firmly believe that because of what the club embodies, history-wise. And it's not an arrogance thing either. I just think that there's something different about it. And the players say it, Ibra's played for so many big clubs. He says the place was always felt most special was Milan, and he always wanted to come back. And I just think there is a certain romance about it. And, here we are with big players wanting to stay. But, it takes two to tango, and we've got to get the negotiations right.
Matt?
Yeah, I think Tijani stays. And I think that, as you guys have been pointing out, that this would probably be solidified and made official in the summer. I think that there are a couple of different ways where this could go. It could be, yeah, I want to stay. I'm happy here. And now all of a sudden he goes above and beyond. Milan play better second half of the season. They turn things around. Tijani's at the very heart of that. And does that become a little bit more leverage going into the summer, where it's more teams would come in, and now they're saying, look, we discussed this in the winter. Yesterday's price is not today's price. He wants a little bit more. So I think that if you build in the doubling plus some, I think that's maybe where that extra cushion comes in and says, hey, like we're more than doubling your salary. We're going to give you 5+ bonuses tied to Champions League, domestic competition, so on and so forth. So I think this does get done. But I also think, too, the element that many people don't maybe discuss too much when it comes to transfers, they just kind of focus more on the dollars and cents, the figures, salaries, all that, is I think he's really happy here. His family seems really happy here. And I think that is a broader conversation to have when it comes to player transfers. Is you might be getting paid more there, but as Murata just mentioned, like peace of mind, happiness, all these sorts of things. They're not just talking to the club, but they're not just saying, well, what can I do with this club from a sporting sense? Like, is my family safe here? Are they happy here? Can they grow here? Can I see myself having a family here? Those are the things I look at with Tijani and some of the other individuals. Theo, he's a father as well. You look at that and you're like, okay, to Oli's point, like beyond the prestige, the heritage of the club and all those things, I think that Tijani seems really, really happy here, and so does his family. And I think that makes penning a new contract and committing to the club an easier decision for him.
Yeah. So hopefully we get Reijnders done. And as you guys had mentioned, Theo, I think this one, next to Maignan, obviously has the biggest question marks. Again, we've seen and heard reports for quite some time now. Ali, you mentioned urgency. This contract expires in 2026 for Theo. So I want to talk about the player overall and kind of like where value lies, right? There is no question of what Reijnders has done in terms of consistency and level of play since he has arrived at Milan. Theo, I have questions. And this is not me disliking the player. I think he's phenomenal. On his day, he is, in my opinion, the best left back in the world in terms of the modern game and what is asked of you. However, I have seen lots of inconsistencies from last season. I know a lot of it has to do with where the midfield is at and that sort of defensive vacuum of being able to defend in transition. We know Theo's strength is not being a great defender. We know what makes him so valuable, and that's his ability to go forward, his pace, his power, his ball striking ability, his technique. We know how great he can be. He's also getting into his mid to late 20s, as you guys mentioned. And again, in terms of big payday, Theo, Ali, from what we understand, is asking for 8 million net. From certain reports, there's other stuff being stated that I've seen that says, oh, it's not necessarily 8 million. It might just be a number to like throw out there and kind of negotiate a little bit less. I do question this one. I really do. I know he is saying that he likes it here. His Zoe, his partner, is obviously from the country. He has a son here. I think they're expecting another child as well. And I think it's a girl. So Theo has been here. We know that sort of relationship that he had with Paolo Maldini and how massive that was in terms of getting him here. We saw that whole summer of the take a pill in Ibiza with Maldini in that picture. So we know what he kind of thinks of the club. The fact is this: one of the best players in the world at his position is asking for a big payday. Do Milan end up doing that? I have question marks on how his game ages over the course of time. However, a little less questions because it's Serie A and you're able to age gracefully physically. So for me, I think this is more of, does Theo like it here culturally? Not the city, not the country. Does he like fitting in where this regime is? Does he like the leadership? Is he okay with what's going on? Because for me, there's a lot of character issues on the pitch that I've seen. We've seen the not covering back against Parma. We see the issue against Lazio, the spout against Fiorentina where he's getting sent off. Whatever happened with the penalty situation there. And the overall play has been inconsistent, in my opinion, for what his standards are, I should say. Ali, I have doubts on this extension. Are you kind of in the same boat with that? Or is it just a matter of, if you give him the money, he's going to stay? Or is it just a lot of ulterior factors as well?
This is definitely the most difficult one of the lot. Because I think it's not like Reijnders where we're weighing up, putting him on a salary that certainly matches his output, and you're talking about a player who has developed into his role, and we've seen a lot of upside with him. We think that he's only in the early stages of his cycle with us. Theo's in his 6th season with us, and I think that any player that spends half a decade at a club, you're instantly... Yeah, I don't know. I thought the same with Leao as well. I thought once they hit half a decade with us, they might think that it's time for the next step in their career. Neither of them have any kind of boyhood attachment to Milan. They no doubt feel an awful lot of loyalty for the fact that we brought them in together in 2019, and we've given them each a renewal as well in that time. But they'd be more than welcome to field calls from other teams, and it isn't the same as like a Tonali type situation where it was like ripping the heart out of the team. However, I believe that fullback is the weakest position in modern football at the moment. I don't think there are many elite players in the role at all, and especially on the left side as well. Theo does fall into that category, but as you mentioned, it's on his day. We haven't seen his day often enough in the last couple of seasons. In fact, post-Scudetto season, really. You look at his numbers, like in terms of goals and assists, they just about level out every single season, coming in and around 10 goal contributions, all comps, which isn't an astronomical amount, by the way. I think people talk about him as if he's this ridiculous attacking left back. He has grown in certain aspects of his game, but there are other aspects of his game, and I think consistency, the main one, where there are still big question marks. For me, it's his discipline. So at a time when the cast around him is rotating quite a bit, chance for him to step forward and be a leader. He's wearing the armband almost every week now because Calabria is no longer a fixed part of the team. And discipline has become quite a big issue with him for me. Last season, he served 3 separate suspensions in the league. 2 because he hit a yellow card threshold and 1 because he got a red card. This season, he's obviously served a 2-game ban for lashing out at the referee. A captain shouldn't do that. Whole separate discussion on, the merits of that and everything. But I just, I don't know. I'm looking at a player who appears to be a bit more agitated on the field. I can't claim credit for this. It's Sky's Manuele Baiocchini said yesterday that something you've got to take into consideration with Theo is that his best friends and his mentor have all left since he's been here. Maldini being his mentor and the one that he brought in and had a close relationship with, but he was also incredibly close to Brahim Diaz, and he was very close to Sandro Tonali, and they've both left. So that's something to factor in. Maybe, I think there's one thing, you can be settled on the family side of things. As you say, young kid, got another one on the way. That can all be fine. But if he's starting to hate his job, I think then it becomes a little bit of a problem. I don't think we're there yet with him. I'd like to see, you've got to give him a few more months at least. But that's the one side of it, is the position being weak. He'd be very difficult to replace. He is still a leader of the team because of the amount of time that he's been here. But the other side is, Sky said he's asking for 9 mil net, actually, which is, you just don't pay it, do you? But as you said, you don't go in with like the lowest you'll take as your first request. You know what I mean? You go in with something ridiculous, and then I think the idea is that he will come in and around the Leao salary. But I don't think I'd pay him that, because I don't think he's a match winner, a game breaker in quite the same way. However, I still think the overall narrative surrounding Theo, from the bits that filter out, is positive. And I think that he isn't as unsettled as he's been made out. I was just playing devil's advocate a little bit there. I think if he'll sort of come to his senses a little bit, and he is represented by quite a difficult agent. But if everybody comes to their senses, I think it could get done around 6 mil. And I think that is a figure that just about most fans would say, okay, we can live with that, because we'd have to go out and pay a lot to replace a player of his quality. The problem is if you start talking about these kind of figures and he continues to have a really difficult season, right? And I still think there's a thing with Theo where, paradoxically, we think of him as a big game player in the sense that he's had big moments for us in the biggest games. However, at the same time, he's never scored a Champions League goal for us. There are certain things that, I don't know. I just feel like
I can't remember the last goal contribution he's had in a massive match in Serie A, even.
Yeah,
I think his marquee performance
Atalanta
for the club in a big match was obviously that comeback derby win against Inter the year they won the Scudetto, where he gets that red card towards the end, and you knew that was every single ounce of energy he was putting in to win a match. It wasn't necessarily oh wow, look at this stunning goal or assist that he had, or ball carrying ability. Maybe I would say probably Atalanta, right? Because that was a relatively big match where he scored that goal that was miraculous, really. I think the
2 legs against Spurs in the Champions League were where I thought he was outstanding. He created the only goal of the tie that Brahim Diaz scored, and just in both legs he played the role of shithouse brilliantly.
Yes.
He got Romero sent off, for example, in the second leg. That was where I thought, oh yeah, he loves this occasion. But then there's stuff you forget that in that derby comeback, he got sent off for an awful challenge on Dumfries. Okay, we can laud him as a hero for that, but...
Well, no, fair point. I think you're right in a sense, but from what I remember from it, and in that moment, it was do anything to stop Inter from scoring.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of foul that it was too, because I remember Skriniar bumps into him and he just gave him the pound on the shoulder. All right, yeah, you had to do that. What were you supposed to do in this scenario? But the real key thing here is, with this contract extension, to stay on topic, fellas, and Matt, I'll let you answer this one. There's 1 year left after this. You get into the summer, right, with no extension, and we're in a little similar situation that we've had in the past. I think this management would be fielding calls to sell him, right? Because they don't want a repeat of Kessie, Çalhanoğlu, and Donnarumma, where your star player is walking out the door for 0 fee. If in the event of no extension arriving by summer, Matt, you go first. Do you think he walks or is sold? Sorry, he doesn't walk.
I'd like to think I would see him sold. I think that you look at the way our team is being built. We did sell Tonali, and frankly, if we sold Sandro Tonali, I think anybody's fair game at any price. And I think that PTSD still lingers with this club. Maybe not necessarily this management, but they looked at how the exits of Hakan, Gigio, and Kessie played out, and that's a PR nightmare if this guy leaves for free, right? So I think that Milan have to tread very carefully here, because I think that you don't want to get into a position where you feel you have a good bond with the player, his entourage, and you say he's like, yeah, I want to stay, I'm going to stay, and then it gets to June and he's like, pay me this or I leave. And that's kind of the issue you have, right? And Theo strikes me as that type of individual. I'm not saying he has no loyalty or doesn't love Milan. This is business, guys. We're talking the amount of money that he's potentially inclined to make in his next deal. It's tons of money. I don't think Gigio, when he signed that contract to go to PSG, was saying, F you, Milan, I hate you guys. It's business, right? That's just the nature of the game now. So I think that Milan has to be very careful with this. I think that, not to just beat a dead horse. I think you guys did a great job, Ali, as well, kind of encapsulating like what the current situation is regarding, his current position as far as a player and trajectory wise, where we see this contract and how ultimately good it can be on the back end. I think that there is some concern on my end that if you let him leave, how much does that impact a guy like Rafa? And not just from a relationship standpoint and a squad standpoint, because there's very few members from that Scudetto winning team, which is not too long ago, that still exist on this team. If you get rid of a guy like Theo and Ali just mentioned, there's really not much elite quality at this position in world football, let alone world-class quality. How much does that impact the overall play of a guy like Rafa, who that left side, they've formed a really good relationship, and that harmony has always been there, even in matches where we don't have much going. We're like, yeah, but we have Theo and Rafa, we have a chance in this game. So I think that Milan have to be very careful with how they go about this. I do want to say that Milan has done a good job, as I mentioned off the top of the episode, in getting these deals done. It wouldn't surprise me if they did reach an agreement, because I truly do think Theo wants to stay here. My one major concern that Ali just mentioned is, who is that individual surrounding him at this club that is going to be that one individual to have that sort of conversation with him, and big picture conversation, saying, you can be a club legend here. We see you as a captain, because Davide Calabria, by all accounts, is probably not coming back based on reports. This guy's next in the captaincy pecking order to take that role entirely. How much does that impact his decision? If it doesn't, then I think it's pretty obvious where we're going to head here. Right now. But if he's saying, like we're seeing in reports and media, that he loves it here, it's almost you're only going to call his bluff and saying, all right, like the captain's leaving, like you can be the next guy if you want it. If you don't, then I think that that's where the relationship could potentially end, because you don't want another situation where he leaves.
Yeah, you would think Zlatan would come out and stabilize this, but
just on the Calabria thing, because I don't think we're going to mention him as part of this, I'm going to stick my neck out on the line. I am 90% sure that Calabria renews.
Okay.
Which might surprise you, but it's just way too convenient. It's way too convenient. He is apparently not asking for a pay rise at all. He doesn't earn a huge amount at the moment.
Correct,
and people might moan and say, oh, well, it means he keeps the armband. I mean, in actual fact, he doesn't. I think he's one of those players that actually doesn't mind being a backup. And he loves the
way
club.
his body is going.
Yeah, I think
at this point of his career, too, like, where's he going to go? Is he going to get a starting role at another top club? He's not.
No, I think it gets done. I think all the stuff that's happening at the moment is white noise, and the closer it gets to the deadline, it probably puts us in a better position, really. Because I don't think clubs are flying in.
I don't think
Galatasaray are one of them, I believe, but yeah.
I don't think they've seen his injury record. Speaking of injury records, players,
good segue.
Thank you, Magic Mike. This one was actually a player and contract that I thought, oh, he's a goner at a certain point. Part of me still believes that, because I still think Bayern Munich lurking in the background for this. I think the Neuer situation and everything else that they've sort of had there is, in my opinion, sort of disastrous with the way Bayern have handled that. For a club of their size, I think it's just been sort of embarrassing that they keep on pushing out Neuer like this. It's not a stain on his legacy, because he's one of the greatest of all time, but it's not aging well. For Mike, I think there's been two major things with him. One, it's his health. because God knows how you're holding your breath every time he lands after jumping in the air. Like it's Matt, sorry to bring him up, Joel Embiid in the NBA, in the NBA, where you're like, oh my God, is this guy going to destroy his ankles every time he lands? And then it's, how are you not defending your near post? Other than that, Maignan has been great this year, I've thought. Certainly there's been moments in which he's been exposed, and I think he's done a poor job. But quite honestly, I think we've seen the best version of him more often than not this season. His distribution is always top tier. I think that's something that's never going to go away. I think his reflex saves have been great. I think Club Brugge, that match in the Champions League, he saved us straight up. There were moments within that match where he was saving tons of chances. And I know a lot of it's not his fault because we keep exposing him on constant occasions, right? Because people are always like, oh, Maignan can't save near post here. And I know a lot of it's coming from Interisti and all that sort of stuff. But on his day, sort of what we were talking about with Theo, he is still a top 5, top 10 goalkeeper in the world, let alone Serie A. So for me, I think this extension is a no-brainer. And again, with the way we talk about salaries and players, here's the fact of the matter. He's one of the better goalkeepers on the planet. And in so that being a fact, you have to pay him like it. I think Maignan for Ali, I'll let you take over with the figures here that have been floated out there. From what we understand, 5 to 6 million, sort of that range, correct? Is that where those figures have been at? And would you do that? I would say 5 million plus you got to have him with incentives, because if he's having issues staying healthy as a goalkeeper, you sort of have to cover yourself as a club in regards to that. Because if you make more appearances and if you're there, you're healthy, you're doing your job at a high level, then you should get paid like that. So again, where are kind of things standing with the Maignan stuff? Because we've seen positive reports. With Theo, it was sort of like they're not really talking right now. And Maignan, it's sort of like there are progressions with this. So where can you update us with that? And what's a figure that you would be okay with paying, Mike?
Things seem a bit more positive on this front, to be honest. There was a big doubt going into the summer, I think, about sort of where the future was with him and with Theo. And it was almost being weighed up by the media, like which of the two is going to go. And from what we heard, the club were always 10 times more willing to sell Maignan compared to Theo, which might surprise people because, you know, you get more value for Theo. But yeah, with Maignan,
the keeper.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with Maignan as well. I think it's a similar discussion in the sense that, you know, part of the Scudetto winning team is clearly a locker in the dressing room out there on the field. I think he's quite a charismatic guy. He's apparently absolutely ridiculous on the training ground in terms of how meticulous he is with things. I don't think he got on very well with the old goalkeeping coach, Tony Roberts. So I think the change that's come in this time with Fonseca's new staff has actually helped him a little bit. And that's why I think we're seeing him return to good levels. I think with Maignan, and it probably extends to almost every keeper in the world, right? But I think with Maignan, you get some really, really good games. You get some game-saving stops from him. I mean, look at the one that he made on Moise Kean the other night at San Siro. Like, literally kept them top spot in that group. You get some mistakes from him. You do, and we have exposed him a lot, as you mentioned. But when you boil it all down, he wins you more points than he costs you. So he's your net benefactor by having him in your team. One thing to consider is that the injury record is a thing. Obviously, in the Scudetto season, he missed 11 games. He missed 31 the season after, and he missed 10 last season. This season, touch wood, he's been okay, albeit with a couple of scares. But yeah, he's turning 30 in a few months. So again, we're into that. This is the last big contract of his career type discussion. But once again, the same theme, feels a strong sense of attachment to the club, absolutely not agitating for a move. There have been calls from clubs, but I don't think they've been anything very, nothing too concrete. It was
There's no
Bayern,
real
and then
top clubs to upgrade to, right? Or top
no.
teams that are bigger than, like you mentioned, with you're not worried about Reijnders going to Spurs because it's Spurs. Like, what I've always thought this, what top club that has a top goalkeeper right now or doesn't have a top goalkeeper exists? You could only argue Bayern, because everywhere else, if you're looking at these clubs, they don't necessarily need a goalkeeper, and they're not probably going to pay whatever Milan would ask for, right?
The one club that I would keep an eye on is Man City, because they seem to be absolutely open to the idea of selling Edison to
That's
Saudi
true
Arabia
because of the Saudi
because of the
money
big
too.
money. And what would Pep want if he hangs around? That is, what would they want? He would want someone who's very good at playing the ball with his feet as a goalkeeper.
That's true.
So
You're right.
that looks quite a good fit, actually. But also, I don't know.
Disregard what I said.
It doesn't feel right. But it also doesn't
No,
feel
you're
right
right,
to me.
you're
I
right.
can't imagine Maignan at Man City. I just can't. I don't know. There doesn't seem to be anyone screaming out. There's nothing too concrete in the media. So I think that these are negotiations that we can do with a little bit of calm too. And I think the salary will come in sort of a level below Theo. Just because of the things that we mentioned, a little bit older, injury record, goalkeeper replaceable position. I think he's on 2.6 mil net now. Got the growth decree, still applies to contracts that were signed before it was abolished, so we can continue it on. And I think it might come in around about 5.5, including bonuses. Bonuses are going to be big in all these, and I think that's a point to hammer home on. Is
It would
that,
also be cheaper than Donnarumma's contract extension, correct? Because when his last contract with Milan was 6 million net.
6 million, yeah,
So,
that's right.
all right.
Again, it's like the Reijnders thing. If I'm Maignan, I am probably going in and saying, look at my body of work and look at where I am in my position and look at what I've contributed to the club. But I think the club also have enough leverage in this sense to go back and be like, let's be sensible. 5 rising to 5.5 would be fine with me. I actually don't mind loading up these contracts with bonuses, because if we're paying out these bonuses, it means we've done well. I'm actually happy with a 5 mil base and a 7 mil bonuses.
Of course,
because if a million of those bonuses are because we've got to the semi-finals of the Champions League and we've won the league, then who gives a shit? Like,
we've said this many a times. Like, that's only a good thing if incentives are hit. Incentives are positives. They're rarely negatives. So, Matt, do you agree with that salary wage there? Like,
I do, and I think that the Mike Maignan extension feels like it'll go a little bit smoother than one for Theo would, just based on the personality of the individual. Again, no disdain towards Theo, but I just think that the position, the presence that he has around this group, I think that's very important. And if I'm his agent, I'm going to bat in those conversations regarding a new contract and saying, like, you see what this defense is, right? Like, you see what positions they put this guy in. Without him, it's hard to imagine where we would be. Because I think in certain conversations, I've always felt that I think Milan can get another goalkeeper. And guys, look, we're having this conversation about Maignan. We were in a position with Gigio where we can't lose this guy. We got someone better. So I think it's definitely possible to get another good goalkeeper if we did not come to an agreement with Mike Maignan, because we did it. We've proven that we can do it, granted under a different management regime. Sure. But I think that that's not a conversation I want to have. I don't want to have this conversation where we're consistently discussing overhauling and losing top players. I think that we're not quite there at the end of the cycle with this group, this core group that was there from the Scudetto winning season, where I'm ready to just say, Mike's got to go, Theo's got to go, let's blow this up. Yeah. Because I think that's a very dangerous precedent to set when you're in a position where potentially we might have new ownership. We're trying to get a new stadium. Like, big picture, you have to think at it more at a macro level
doing a year.
And say, like, okay, where do we see this team? Like, are we a selling team? Are we punting? Are we in a rebuild mode? Because if you think you're going to sell a Maignan or a Theo, or both, or you're going to have this sort of firm stance on those two, I think you're signaling a clear shift in this project and saying we're rebuilding, because you don't let those two guys in their prime just leave for, I guess, maybe a little bit of dollars and cents. And I'm maybe looking at it too lightly in a conversation when it comes to the contract. this comes with the territory. This comes with the baggage of trying to be ambitious and win things. You can't be so cheap and frugal when it comes to transfers when you have record high revenues and you're making a ton of money commercially off the field, social, all these sorts of things. Everything is trending in the right direction for Milan from a financial sense and economic sense, where they should be really in positions to get these renewals done. In previous years, they had that fallback excuse. Well, we can't give Juju this. That's a lot for our wage bill. So they had that out. This current position financially, in my opinion, they don't have that out. And I think that from optics, this will not go over well if one of these two guys do not sign this contract, truthfully. So with all that being said, I think that Mike's deal does get done. And I actually do think it's something that could potentially get done before the summer. I don't think Milan want to get into a position where they're trying to get not one, but two new deals for a player that's expiring a year later in June. I just don't see that being a reality. So I do think that Milan get this done. And to Ali's point, the figure seems extremely fair. I think this player has been a great servant to the club. And if you kind of just look at what he would potentially get paid relative to some of the other, not even top goalkeepers, solid goalkeepers. I mean, Szczesny was getting paid $6 million for reference last year, right? $6 million, give or take.
Szczesny was getting insane money. He was the highest paid keeper in Serie A.
I think if you want to elevate the overall quality of Maignan and get the most out of this next group of years that you would sign him in a contract, you improve the defense. You don't put him in positions where he's going to potentially get more goals conceded. He's going to be more at harm to pick up injuries. It's kind of all in that same conversation, guys, right? It's if you're putting him in positions where he's having to go above and beyond and every game is an absolute disaster back there, that's where you fall with the risk of putting your goalkeeper in positions where he's going to pick up injuries.
Speaking of players that could help protect him,
you're on a roll today, man.
Yeah, really.
We gotta keep it moving. We're already at 47 minutes, fellas. I'm trying my best here to keep it
a quick one. To be fair,
I'm partially to blame. Matteo Gabbia. Now this one just feels like a formality, correct, Ali? Like we know the situation is completely different than any other player here, right? Where he's been with the squad for a couple of years, had appearances here and there, obviously went on loan to Villarreal, comes back and has been a defensive stalwart. Like our best defender since he's come back. He's proven that time and time again. He had that signature moment in scoring that goal in the derby. This is essentially a formality, and I think a very important thing that I'm sure you guys have mentioned on the Sempre Milan podcast that Matt and I have mentioned, we have an Italian worth keeping and paying. and that's massive because it carries weight. Like, for example, when you have a player like this that is worth keeping and paying the salary that he is asking for, you could keep him for a decade. You don't have to worry about him going anywhere else, right? Tonali was totally different. He was a mercurial type of talent. Just the offer coming from Newcastle was absurd. With Davide Calabria, you sort of mentioned it. It looks like he is going to be staying. So that's not too much of a worry there. But with Donnarumma asking for all that sort of money, it was kind of evident he was on his way out. And then you could say the same thing for Romagnoli. Romagnoli didn't really want to take less. And if he was going to take less, he was going to go to his boyhood club in Lazio. So it sort of seemed like that was a perfect match. I know there was like other stuff with Romagnoli at the time as well. But yeah, Gabbia seems like a no-brainer. I'd be very happy for this to happen. He's just, at the very worst, I would say, and I know Matt has agreed with me on this. I don't know what you think, Ali. At the very worst, you have a third or fourth choice option at Milan for a very long time. And that's invaluable. Considering injuries, rotation with the sort of schedules that they have now with UEFA, getting Gabbia done is just everything positive that you would like moving forward with the club. Homegrown talent has shown that he could shine and play in some of the bigger matches in this country and league. So for me, Gabbia seems like a formality. Is that what we're going with here?
Yeah, I don't think it was ever in doubt. I don't think we needed to worry about him walking away. But no, I think in terms of numbers, I think it's going to be a little bit higher than was first thought. He earns just shy of $1 million now, and it's sounding like it's going to be about 2.2-ish, but that's absolutely fine. We're arguing cents there, aren't we? But I think it's an important recognition of a very, very noticeable growth over the last 12, 18 months, going into last summer, and sort of like, it was like, which Italian club are we going to sell him to? We thought he was fifth choice centre back, kind of felt sorry for him because he's at 23, he's at the age now where he needs to be playing regular football. Yeah. Villarreal come in, and I think that is worth mentioning, the fact that he accepted the idea of going to Villarreal, taking himself out of his comfort zone in order to get a few more minutes under his belt. And he definitely came back a better player. The circumstances that he came back under were obviously not ideal. We had an injury crisis, but in a weird way, it was the sliding doors moment, and it presented the opportunity for somebody like him to show that he has become a very well-rounded centre-back. And I think in 2024, he's probably been the most consistent defender by a mile. For us in the calendar year, and probably this season too. Shame about the calf injury that took him out for a couple of important games. I think we've looked a lot more shaky without him. I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but I think we've won all but 2 games with him in the starting lineup, and our average goals per game conceded goes up by about 0.5 without him in the team. It's roughly that. So his impact is noticeable. He's definitely part of the best pairing, in my opinion, whether it's Gabbia Tomori, maybe, in terms of them being complementary profiles. That I would probably start them in the big games still. But no problems with the salary. It's not the sexy renewal of the bunch, is it? But I think it means a lot to us as fans that somebody like this is recognised for what they've done, the hard work that they've put in. He's had some brilliant moments like the Derby goal, and he sort of embodies Milanismo, right? So we'll be very happy to see his smiling face when he signs. It might be another one that actually waits until the start of next season. Okay. Purely just to get another year, or alternatively, it might just be done until 2029. We'll see, but yeah, all positive. I will use the opportunity though, since it's a quick one, to mention something that I don't think people are too hyper aware of. In the FFP is sort of now morphed into this cost control ratio thing that UEFA have brought in, and we mentioned before about like transitioning back towards being a top club, and that means you've got to pay your best players and things like that. There's an article over on our Substack, another shameless plug, but go check it out. Isaac did some calculations, and if essentially by the start of next season, clubs have to be at 70% squad cost to revenue ratio. Right. That means that the amortization of all the fees added up with the gross salary can only be 70% of the total revenues that you earn. We are currently on projections going to be at 49% going into next season. So there are margins to increase our costs, shall we say.
So however, it's a small 21%. Yeah.
Inter surprisingly coming about 65%. Juve are quite substantially over. So that's something to watch. This market that they had in the summer, it might have been them putting all their chips in a bit too early.
I think that means a certain striker is on his way out. For sure.
Yeah, Milik will be the big sale of next summer. And what that means is that obviously we can increase our costs, but you've got to keep an eye on the revenue, because in the last financial year, we were able to count on the entire capital gain from the Tonali sale. Year before that, you got the run to the Champions League semi-finals, which inflated the revenue. But with the commercial deals that we're signing, and just naturally the inflation of revenues from higher ticket prices and things like that, we should be able to remain fairly constant. And the target is apparently to post either a small profit or a small loss for next year, which implies that we're remaining fairly consistent with everything. You got 20% to play with, lads. Show us that you actually want to win trophies.
And again, how much of a factor is CDK's finances being plugged in for 2025? Seems like Adley and Kalulu are, unfortunately, formalities at this point. You just kind of knew the second those deals would happen. I guess that is kind of helpful as well. How much of, just real quick to get Matt's thoughts, and then we'll go to Zlatan's comments. How much of a factor of these, I guess, more games now in the Champions League, a boost for the club? Because this is, I guess we're fully not going to get those reports anytime soon, but the way we're trending in the Champions League, knock on wood, we should be able to make the knockout stages with the remaining teams that we face. How big a factor are all those things in helping that sort of stuff and spending, hopefully?
Big, like, it's more money. It's more money. And This is something that could be debated in an entirely separate podcast, and me, AJ, and Maddie keep threatening to do it. But just the way that like football finance is going, everything's getting bigger. There's been a lot of pushback on the ticket prices for some of the games this season. Liverpool, for example, there were 55,000 there because of how high that game has to be a sellout. If you do not sell that out, you've got something wrong. However, the ticket prices were set similarly high for the Juve game, and that sold out well in advance. And it is going to be somewhere in and around our highest ever grossing game at the box office, so that would be Redbird's pushback as well. The tickets are being sold, So I don't know. That's a tough
I know
one.
where you're coming from. Yeah,
ticket prices in European football are viewed differently to every other sport, especially some of the American sports. Maddie always comes back with like, I can't see a Lions game for less than $400, and I'm like, that's not a badge of honor. Like, we're fighting for sport to be accessible.
I think it's just one of those things where, like, for example, like Milan fans are complaining about not winning a Scudetto for like 10 years, and then you're like talking to a Roma fan, and they're just like, "Oh, okay, thanks, we appreciate that." We feel good.
Yeah.
You know the meme with Mel Gibson on the set of Passion of the Christ, where he's talking to the actor, playing Jesus.
Yeah.
And he's got blood all over him. He's just like, my problems are terrible, and he's just like, okay, thank you. So,
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
But yeah, more money's good, right? Yeah, more games, more money. The players are all dropping.
More money's good if you use that money, I guess we should say, right? Santangelo, Gabbia Extension, you confident in it real quick before we go?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think it's a solid deal. I think it's important to have Italians in this team. I know people will say, well, we want to have the best players at every position, regardless of nationality. To an extent, yes, obviously. I still want to have some sort of Milan DNA, as Ali alluded to, right? You want to still have, you want to show the next generation of Milan fans, youth Milan players, that there is a pathway to staying at this club. You can come here. You can maybe not start right away, but you can grow into an important first team player. Not every player is going to be a superstar, and that I think is a very good thing. And I think just on the Gabbia side specifically, when it comes to me as just a fan, these are the types of deals you get really happy about, because I think it's a player that, he could have had ill will. He could have said, you guys have an injury crisis, I'm not coming back. You guys treated me a certain way. You guys viewed me as a 5th or 6th center back. No. He's like, my team Milan needs me. Like, I'm coming back. And swallowed his pride, and he's like, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to show you that I can be a contributor. And I think that's a testament to, creating a culture where it allows that, right, at the club, where players can come back, and it's maybe similar fate to Daniel Maldini. Maybe he's saying, like, maybe I can come back. I don't know. But I think the point being is that, when you get him on these wages, the wages are very fair. The deal's not going to sour towards the back end. He's not going to cause a fuss if he's not starting one match day over the other. So this is a really good deal. And I'm as a fan, I'm happy that, he came back and he's contributing the way he is, because I think he's turned into an important player for us.
Yeah, absolutely. No denying it. Final comments. Zlatan had some comments on the transfer market, Juventus. The article is going to be linked in the description that you guys over at Sempre Milan had translated. But there is a specific quote in that in which I'm going to take and sort of discuss. And Ali, maybe you could add a little bit more context to it, because on a face value and surface level with these quotes, it pisses me off. Quite frankly, it really infuriates me. So the quote went like this. This is a question to Zlatan, where he is asked if the club will strengthen in January. And I'll just read the quote here. Is it necessary? Do you have any wishes? Ibra asked the journalist, smiling. Everyone knows everything and everyone has advice. Everyone is an expert. Shout out us. I'm joking. The market is every day. We have a scouting system that shows us the players, what is needed and what is not needed in a loop. So basically, they're a normal club.
In a system.
Right. And here's the final quote that kind of triggered me and many others. But today, there is no thought of strengthening anything. Then we will see what happens in these next 2 months, more like 6 weeks. Let's hope nothing involving our players' sales. If we stay the same, we will move forward. It's a bit vague. It's a bit honest. It's a bit infuriating. When you come out and say something like there's no thought of strengthening anything when you're in 7th place in Serie A, 8 points behind the league leaders, and we've seen the sort of inconsistencies of the Champions League. Sure, we've had a big marquee win lately against Real Madrid, but the overall standings, it's pretty negative because of those losses against Leverkusen and Liverpool. Don't say that. Just don't say that. Just don't say you're not thinking of strengthening. And maybe Ali, if you could bring some context to this, and maybe that's not the way it sounded in the cadence in his voice, but don't ever say you're not interested in strengthening the squad when you guys are sucking, and when you have glaring holes within the team, and when you also had said Jimenez would be a figure this season, and we're in the middle of November, and he has yet to make an appearance, where fullback is the most pathetic of positions next to your center backs. It's getting to a point in where I don't think and hope that his image gets ruined for what he's done as a player. But you cannot be going down this path. And to some people who think he was a talking piece for Redbird, their comments are sort of gaining a certain amount of validity. Would you agree to this, or were these sort of comments in quotes not necessarily reflective of what they're planning to do this January?
2-part answer. First part, this interview was a joke. Not like, it was a joke, like it was an actual joke. It was at an event called Kings League. I'm not really familiar with what it is, but I gathered it's
thing or no?
I don't know. I've not heard of it, but I gather that it's some kind of like football event, whatever. He showed up because he's an ambassador. I don't mean a joke as in like it was a parody, but rather the way that the interview was conducted was in a jokey way. For example, the first question was, is Milan Juventus going to be as entertaining as Kings League? So like there's a little bit of, you got to pick the tone of it a little bit. And to Zlatan's defense here, and again, playing devil's advocate a little bit, he isn't going to come out and say, yes, we plan to make several signings in January, because you are then kind of weakening your negotiating position with every negotiation that you go into. And you don't want to lay out all your cards on the table 6 weeks ahead of time. The second part to the answer, and could go on for hours about Zlatan so far, even just in his advisor role with us, is that I think people are a bit fed up of the way that he conducts interviews. You said, he's vague and he's cryptic, but to me, it seems like he can't answer a question in a serious way. Even when he was sat alongside Fonseca for his unveiling, he sat alongside all of the summer signings for their unveilings. He was being asked questions, and he really, really struggles to give serious answers. You might say that's his personality. I don't think that's what the job title, it can't match up that way.
There has to be more transparency,
Yeah, I mean, Geoffrey Moncada promoted to technical director. He has done a handful of interviews in his time at the club, which is coming up to 6 years now. He is not the mouthpiece of the club, despite the fact that at least on paper, in role terms, he's the one who calls the shots. We know that's not the case. It's more of a collegial thing. Zlatan comes back in a senior advisor role, and you're thinking, okay, this is the guy who's going to be facing the camera now. We never see him at Milanello. He's there once every few weeks, it seems, goes to games and things like that. But what is becoming very apparent to me is that this was all done in a very rushed manner. They've brought this figure in to try and gel everything together, but from pre-retirement, from the period after his retirement, he's got so much stuff booked in that he just can't commit that much time to this particular role. And then when we do hear from him, and we're looking for clarity as a fan base. We're asking for some kind of concrete vision on how we're going to move forward. And all we get back, and all we get back is quips and jokes, and asking the interviewer what they think, laughing about things. And then the one thing that he does say is that we're not thinking of strengthening anything. And then he hints like, let's hope nothing happens with one of our players, like a big player gets sold. I can understand why fans are very frustrated with that. Nor do I think that we should have to put up with it just because it's Zlatan and he's that kind of guy.
Right. Yeah.
I think if he's going to be the one that speaks to the media the most, notice how Furlani doesn't do it much anymore. Ottavio's never done it. Cardinale rarely does it, and when he does, he just seems to piss everyone
He's
off.
like at business conferences, yeah.
Yeah, and if Zlatan is the guy, I think he needs some work on his interview technique. That's where I'll leave it.
So Matt, it's okay when Zlatan makes comments and jokes like this when he's capable of controlling what is happening on the field because he could score goals because he's a terrific player. Now, he can't. He can't do that. We know, and the hierarchy is all over the place, and who approves what, and who talks, and who's really like making these decisions. He can't even answer Boban correctly on what his job actually is. There's a lot there, and the rumors and theories from fans are Zlatan is, to be quite frank, a talking piece for Redbird, and to be the meat shield, right? Of okay, you handle the PR. The tough questions are going to come in because we may or may not be extending players here. We may or may not be spending money on the transfer market. That's going to push us and elevate us to another level. It's sort of like damage control. It seems like almost every single time we hear him talk, and there's certain, you could handle comments when he's a player, like I said, when he's scoring goals, you don't give a shit. But now, when you have this job and you control all these things, nobody wants to hear these jokes, these funny quirks, you being a lion and all this stuff, right? Because you have a job to do, and it doesn't seem like you're doing that good of a job of it in terms of PR, for sure. What do you kind of make of what his role has been? It's been almost a year now, right? I think he joined last December.
Yeah, that's right.
I believe. So
11 months.
I mean, it's sort of like, what do you do here, bro? So what do you think Zlatan does here?
Honestly, when Martino, you read the quote, and Oli, you kind of clarified that it was sort of in a joking manner, and the arena maybe wasn't meant to be so serious. I can't take too much away from it, in that I already kind of have seen enough from him in this role to kind of understand how things are going to play out. I mean, I think that the tone of certain things that he's done in this role versus what he's done as a player, it's like you don't want to lose sight of the personality, because that's what the personality makes him unique. And that still is something you don't want to kind of take from him. It's something that made Maldini, right? He had that respect. He poised. He handled himself as a director the same way he handled himself as a player, right? But I think we already know what Zlatan is going to be to the media. He's not going to change his ways. Jerry's not going to say you can't speak a certain way to the media. You have to tone it down. This is him. This is who we're getting. And frankly, to Oli's point, it's getting a little bit tiring, because you can tolerate it when a player talks and then he backs it up and you're succeeding and you're winning. But he can't impact the game the way he did as a player. So when you say certain things and things are, shit's hitting the fan, the results are not going the way, and as you mentioned, 7th place, and we're looking the way we do in the Champions League, people are going to say a lot about his, cryptic social media posts and saying like, we just got destroyed by a team and you're posting these things where a lion doesn't comment on it's stupid. It looks silly. And I'm like, this is Milan. Like, I get you have your personality and your way of doing things, but winning cures all. And it looks especially bad when Milan aren't winning. They're not getting results. People have doubts. They have concerns over the direction of the club. So truthfully, I don't know where his role fits in this hierarchy, because it seems to me that he is getting asked the questions on the market, not the directors who are supposed to be the button pushers and the final say with how the market goes. So it is a bit odd, but frankly, guys, it's kind of on brand for this current Milan. If you really look at it, things have kind of been, left out to Zlatan to do the PR, to do the Jimmy Fallon, to do the interviews with the players and the media and the introductory press conferences. And then you have Moncada saying like, with his thumbs up, and you don't hear a peep at these guys. So I don't know. It's all a bit much, but truthfully, I think it's just Milan at this point.
I think it's obviously the owner who has never ran a team like this before. I understand what he did in France and all that kind of stuff, but there is a difference. There is a massive difference between AC Milan and Toulouse, right? So with that, and just the last comment that really irked the shit out of me, and it was from Jerry. It was, what better person to be the face of AC Milan than Zlatan Ibrahimovic? The man who sacked Paolo Maldini. That's just like where that level of tone deafness as an owner and a management comes from. And that's like where the disconnect is, because I think that's probably the best word between this management and the fan base. The communication is lacking. The decisions are, not agreeable. Obviously, you don't want to always listen to the fan base because we're insane, right? So I just think there needs to be a standard and clear hierarchy, because right now we don't know who is who and what is what and who's making the decision, who has the final say. And I think that's a problem, and Milan need to correct that as soon as possible. But obviously, when you start beating Real Madrid, that helps a little bit, and what doesn't help is drawing against Cagliari. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Oli, we appreciate you so much coming on to the podcast. Once again, shocker, we went over from what we planned on doing, but the conversations are always great and always a fantastic time. Again, at Sempre Milan, on Twitter. Again, you can go and follow everything. Read the article that Oli posted regarding Zlatan. That'll be in the description of the video. All of Oli's work. Go and subscribe to the Substack. The work that Isaac does on there and breaking down everything. You guys have questions on finances and how things are supposed to be in the transfer market, budgets, this and that, and whatever little thing possible. Isaac covers it. The Substack covers it. There's bonus podcasts, all of this stuff. Please, I edit so many clips. Just go and look. Just go and check it out. Oli, anything else that I might have not covered there that you want to talk about?
Nope, done a better plug than I could have done. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Everybody who's been following and obviously everyone who signs up on the Substack. You can do a week for free on there. So that's one thing I will say. Give it a trial if you like it. Then fantastic. But it's been a pleasure, boys, as always. Really love chatting about things with you two. And let's hope for an upturn in results before Christmas.
Yeah, we hope so. My guess is beating Juventus and then, I don't know, getting eliminated by Sassuolo in Coppa Italia. That's kind of where this team is at right now. Sant'Angelo, as always, we always plug everything of yours. I'm @Sant'Angelo at AC Milan Bros. Doing a bunch of content writing as well. So any other new projects coming up or no?
No, just some serious fantasy stuff, really. Milan has got me down these days when it comes to writing things. Sometimes when I feel motivated, I will, but anything that I'm working on, I will obviously share on X, Twitter. We're not on Blue Sky, that Milan podcast. I know Women's making that migration there. But Oli,
I went there.
Thanks for coming on. I always tell Martino too that, Sempre Milan podcast is, always in my rotation when it comes to my work commute. It's about an hour change. So I think you guys do a great job over there, and I'm a firm believer in telling people they do a great job when they do. So thank you to you as well, and to the entire crew. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, Torgrud and Maddie, you're dumb and ugly. And again, just plug my stuff here. It's Maddie will understand it. At Martino_Pucci on Instagram as well. All the clips there for Sempre Milan that we put. Sempre Milan, we do have TikTok again. We restarted that. Love how I immediately got kicked out of the account just one day in, which are the issues that we had last time. But any clips that I do and cutting from the podcast and some other future exciting stuff that we hope to have there with Sempre Milan, be sure to go and check it out on TikTok if you're on there. And again, just follow me on Twitter, X, everywhere else. It's greatly appreciated. Subscribe, like, comment, go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Sempre Milan. Congrats on 10K subs over there as well. Other than that, thank you guys so much. Take care.